In the weeks following the Buffett incident, Sunny Pines Estates experienced a renaissance of community spirit not seen since its founding. What began as neighborhood gossip evolved into something more profound, a reassessment of what made their community worth living in. Mrs. Fitzgerald's first act as HOA president was to schedule a community values workshop where residents could voice their opinions about neighborhood priorities. The meeting, held in the community center with chocolate chip cookies baked by the Robertsons, had record attendance. Constance was notably absent, though rumors circulated that she'd been spotted peeking through the window before hurrying away. For too long, we've confused property values with community values, Mrs. Fitzgerald announced, her voice carrying surprising authority for someone who stood barely 5 feet tall. I propose we focus less on grass height and more on being good neighbors. The constitutional amendments that followed were revolutionary by HOA standards: relaxed regulations on holiday decorations, permission for children's basketball hoops in driveways, and most shocking of all, allowance for tasteful garden gnomes in front yards. Mr. Wilson nearly wept with joy. James found himself unexpectedly appointed to the newly formed Neighborhood Mediation Committee, tasked with resolving disputes before they reached citation stage. His experience de-escalating emergency room situations made him remarkably effective at calming homeowners arguing over fence heights or tree branches. Constance remained sequestered in her Tudor-style fortress for nearly a month, emerging only for essential groceries and mail collection. The neighborhood held its connective breath, waiting for lawsuits or retribution that never materialized. Instead, moving trucks appeared one Tuesday morning, loading furniture into their cavernous interiors with practiced efficiency. James was walking Bandit and Scout, now neighborhood celebrities who received treats from admirers on every outing, when he spotted Constance supervising the movers with uncharacteristic quietness. The dogs, displaying either tremendous growth or short memories, showed no reaction to her presence. "You're moving?" James asked, maintaining a safe distance between his canine companions and Constance's designer pantsuit. "To Oakwood Estates," she replied stiffly. "They understand the importance of proper community standards." James nodded, recognizing Oakwood as an even more restrictive development across town. "I wish you the best there." An awkward silence stretched between them, filled only by the sound of movers grunting as they maneuvered a grandfather clock through the doorway. "I didn't leave the buffet on your lawn to be malicious," Constance finally said, her voice lacking its usual edge. "I truly thought it would only be for a day, and I didn't intentionally release my dogs to destroy it," James admitted, "though I can't say I was entirely upset about the outcome." The ghost of a smile flickered across Constance's face. "My grandmother would have hated that buffet anyway. She had simple tastes, called Victorian furniture dust collectors for people with more money than sense." She paused. "The buffet was actually from an auction. I just wanted something impressive for when my sister visited." "The one who married the investment banker?" James asked, recalling neighborhood gossip about Constance's competitive relationship with her more financially successful sibling. Constance looked genuinely surprised. "You remembered that?" "Emergency room nurses remember details. It's part of the job." A moving man interrupted, asking about box labels, and the moment passed. By afternoon, Constance's house stood empty, a for sale sign planted precisely in the center of her meticulously maintained lawn. At the following month's HOA meeting, Ted unveiled his painting, an impressionistic rendering of 2 yellow and chocolate Labradors playing in a sunlit yard, with what could be interpreted as wooden fragments scattered around them. Titled simply Neighborhood Watch, it now hung in the community center as a reminder that sometimes it takes destruction to build something better. The subdivision's unofficial motto, "Perfection is just the beginning," was emblazoned on tiny flags that Constance had mandated for each mailbox. James had accidentally run over his 3 times with his lawnmower. James's house, while modest compared to the mixed mansions populating most of the cul-de-sacs, had one feature that made it the envy of the neighborhood: a sprawling oak tree that provided perfect shade for summer barbecues. Constance had tried twice to have it removed, citing excessive leaf debris as a violation, But the tree predated the neighborhood and was protected by city ordinance. The fact that it dropped most of its leaves directly onto Constance's immaculate driveway each fall was what James's father would have called God's comedy. Bandit and Scout were celebrities in their own right among the neighborhood children, who often pressed their noses against James's fence, hoping for a glimpse of the dog's legendary frisbee-catching abilities. The duo had matching plaid bandanas that James's niece had made for Christmas, which they wore with such dignity that even Constance's yappy Pomeranian, Sir Reginald von Fluffington II, Reggie to the dog walker, seemed impressed. On that fateful Tuesday morning, James had just finished working a night shift and was dreaming of his bed when his phone pinged with the neighborhood watch alert. Large delivery truck on Magnolia Drive. Not scheduled on the approved vendor calendar. Potential security issue. James knew exactly who had sent it. Constance monitored deliveries like a customs agent at an international border. Any package larger than a bread box required HOA pre-approval, a rule she had instituted after Mr. Wilson received a garden gnome collection that she deemed offensively whimsical. Had James been less exhausted, he might have looked out his window to see the delivery truck backing into his driveway. He might have heard the groaning of wood and the cursing of delivery men as they maneuvered a furniture piece so massive it had its own gravitational pull. He might have noticed Constance standing in her driveway, designer sunglasses perched on her nose despite the cloudy day, directing traffic with the authority of someone who believed the entire neighborhood existed solely as a backdrop to her life. But James had been awake for 36 hours straight after covering for a colleague, and he had managed to fall into a sleep so deep that not even Bandit's concern pawing at his bedroom door registered. By the time he woke up 6 hours later, Constance's temporary furniture storage solution had already become the talk of the neighborhood group chat, complete with theories about how long the buffet would remain and a betting pool organized by Ted from 2 doors down. James's phone had 27 missed calls, 14 text messages, and an email from the HOA. Subject line: ILGANT, unauthorized lawn decoration notice. By the time he stumbled to his kitchen for coffee, it wasn't until he glanced out his kitchen window, mug halfway to his lips, that he saw it, a behemoth of Victorian craftsmanship, its ornate gargoyles leering at him from his own front lawn, positioned precisely where his sprinkler system's main valve was located. The coffee mug slipped from his fingers, shattering on the tile floor. Bandit and Scout, startled by the noise, rushed to the window and began a duet of barking that would continue, with only brief intermissions, for the next several hours. And across the street, through the gap in her custom curtains, Constance Wilkins smiled. After extricating himself from Constance's doorway and the humiliation of having his scrub top held hostage by a blessed home mat, James stomped back to his own property. The buffet loomed larger somehow, as if it had been feeding on his frustration and growing stronger by the minute. From inside, Bandit and Scout's synchronized barking had evolved into a complex musical arrangement, complete with high-pitched whines and the occasional howl. The neighbors had started texting. "Everything ok over there? Your dogs are doing a full opera. Mrs. Fitzgerald. Is this about the giant furniture thing? Ted's taking bets on how long it stays. I put $20 on a week. Dave from the corner house. That monstrosity is blocking my view of your beautiful roses. Constance needs a hobby that isn't torturing neighbors. The Robertsons." James circled the buffet like a detective at a crime scene. It was even more ornate up close. Carved wooden faces with expressions ranging from mild constipation to existential dread decorated each corner. The wood was dark, probably walnut, and despite its age, the craftsmanship was undeniable. In another context, perhaps a museum or the lair of a Victorian villa, it might have been impressive. On his lawn, crushing his newly installed sprinkler system and blocking the path to his front door, it was an invader. He pulled out his phone and snapped photos from every angle, making sure to document the damage to his lawn and sprinkler head. Then, against his better judgment, he texted Constance. "This needs to be moved by tomorrow. It's damaging my property." The response came so quickly he knew she must have been waiting with her phone in hand. Don't be so dramatic, James. Quality furniture like this doesn't damage anything. If anything, it's improving the curb appeal of your modest dwelling. Followed immediately by, my contractor says they can't come until Friday now. It's just a few more days. Perhaps you could use this as an opportunity to upgrade your lawn care regime. Those dandelions near your mailbox are an eyesore. James felt his blood pressure rising to levels that would concern him professionally. He took 3 deep breaths, a technique he often suggested to agitated patients, and found it completely useless in his current situation. Inside, he released Bandit and Scout from their window-watching duties. They bounded around him with such enthusiasm that an outsider might have assumed he'd been gone for weeks rather than minutes. Scout, the more perceptive of the two, sensed his mood and offered a consoling lick to his hand, while Bandit continued his campaign of joy, nearly knocking over a lamp in the process. At least you two aren't judgment monsters, James muttered, scratching behind Scout's ears. Though your taste in furniture chewing is questionable. That comment sparked an idea so deliciously petty that James immediately tried to dismiss it. He was a responsible adult, an emergency room nurse who regularly saved lives, not someone who would stoop to revenge fantasies involving his dogs and an overpriced antique. But as he peered out his front window again, watching Constance emerge from her house with a measuring tape, presumably to document some minor infraction in the neighborhood, the fantasy took firmer hold. Bandit and Scout followed his gaze, their eyes locked on the wooden monstrosity, tails wagging with increasing speed as if they could read his thoughts. No, James said firmly, more to himself than to the dogs. We're going to handle this like adults. Scout tilted his head quizzically while Bandit continued wagging, unconvinced. James picked up his phone again and scrolled through his contacts until he found the number for the HOA board secretary, a retired lawyer who had once confided at a neighborhood barbecue that he found Constance more exhausting than my ex-wife's alimony negotiations. It was time to file an official complaint of his own. James stood in the cafe, the crushed remnants of his blueberry muffin forming a sad pastry cemetery on his plate. The walking group ladies continued nodding at Constance's theatrical rendition of her neighborly charity, occasionally glancing his way with expressions of pity usually reserved for shelter animals in sad commercials. He paid for his coffee and walked out without confronting her, a decision his therapist would have applauded as growth, but which felt suspiciously like cowardice. His phone buzzed with a text from Harold, the retired lawyer and HOA secretary. Constance called an emergency executive session last night. Overruled your complaint on humanitarian grounds, since you're clearly in violation of multiple bylaws. I tried, James. That woman has more procedural loopholes memorized than I ever did in 40 years of practice. Attached was a photo of the meeting minutes where his complaint had been formally dismissed, with a margin note in Constance's handwriting that read, James P. needs remedial landscaping education. Possible psychological evaluation. James shoved his phone into his pocket and made a detour on his way home, stopping at the local hardware store. If Constance wanted a landscaping education, he'd give her one. He purchased a roll of caution tape, 4 large tarps, and a set of wooden stakes. The cashier, who lived 3 streets over in Sunny Pines, raised an eyebrow. Home project or crime scene? She asked, scanning the items. Furniture protection, James replied with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Wouldn't want any valuable antiques getting damaged by the weather. When he arrived home, the buffet had acquired new decorations, a laminated notice taped to its surface that read, I saw violation. Removal required, in bold red letters, with a convenient checkbox indicating this was his first warning. The irony was so thick he could have sliced it and served it for lunch. James methodically surrounded the buffet with caution tape, creating a perimeter that extended precisely to the property line between his yard and the sidewalk. He hammered in stakes at each corner and draped the tops over the furniture, securing them with bungee cords. When he finished, the buffet resembled a crime scene exhibit or perhaps an avant-garde art installation. He took photos of his handiwork and posted them to the neighborhood Facebook group with the caption, "In compliance with HOA safety regulations, I secured the unauthorized furniture that was abandoned on my property. Please contact the owner if you have information about its removal timeline." Within minutes, his phone exploded with notifications. The post had more reactions than the announcement of the community pool's renovation. Comments ranged from crying laughing emojis to offers of help to one neighbor suggesting they turn it into a community time capsule and bury it. As predicted, the sky darkened that evening with storm clouds that meant business. Rain fell in sheets, drumming against the windows and turning James's yard into a miniature lake. Through the deluge, he could make out the shape of his tarp creation, now resembling a sad ghost haunting his front lawn. Water pooled around its base, slowly seeping under the protective covering. Constance called 6 times between 8:00 p.m. and 10:30 p.m. James sent each call to voicemail, a small rebellion that felt surprisingly satisfying. Her texts arrived in escalating stages of panic. 8:15 p.m. "You need to reinforce those tops. That's valuable antique wood." 9:22 p.m. "The water is pooling. Do something." 10:03 p.m. "I'm calling the police to report vandalism if anything happens to my property." 10:47 p.m. "James, please. That buffet belonged to my grandmother. I'll have the movers come first thing tomorrow. Just check that it's not floating away." The last text gave him pause. It was the first time in 5 years that he'd heard Constance say please, without it being immediately followed by a demand or criticism. For a moment, he considered going outside in the downpour to adjust the tops. Then lightning illuminated his bedroom, revealing Bandit and Scout sitting attentively by the window, watching the buffet as if it might sprout legs and flee in the night. Their silhouettes against the stormy backdrop looked almost mythological, guardians at the ready. Constance's scream sent ripples through the neighborhood's carefully maintained tranquility. Birds abandoned their perches, squirrels retreated to their nests, and 3 different smart home systems activated their intruder alerts. Mr. Wilson, who was pressure washing his driveway 2 houses down, nearly lost control of the hose, inadvertently creating a small geyser that soaked his prized hydrangeas. Those BSTs. Constance shrieked, her voice climbing octaves previously accessible only to opera sopranos and dog whistles. She stood frozen in horror, one hand clutching her clipboard like a shield, the other pressed against her chest, where her HOA president nameplate normally hung on inspection days. Bandit and Scout, interpreting her screams as enthusiastic encouragement, increased their efforts. Scout pranced in joyful circles, proudly displaying his wooden cherub trophy to this new audience member. Bandit, ever the showman, balanced precariously on what remained of the buffet's frame, tail wagging so vigorously it threatened to propel him into flight. The buffet, which had begun the morning as merely rain-damaged, now resembled something from an archaeological dig, fragmentary, historical, and best left to professionals to identify. Its drawers lay scattered across the lawn in various states of disassembly. What might have been a secret compartment? Victorian furniture was notorious for them, had been thoroughly investigated by Scout's determined nose, revealing a yellowed envelope that now served as a fetch toy. Constance took one tentative step onto James's lawn, designer flats sinking slightly into the rain-softened ground. "Stop. Sit. Bad dough teeth," she commanded, in a tone she usually reserved for residents who painted their front doors unapproved colors. The Labradors, who recognized commands perfectly well when accompanied by treats or when issued by James, displayed selective deafness that would impress medical specialists. Bandit interpreted her advance as an invitation to play chase, leaping from his buffet perch with the grace of an Olympic athlete, and racing to greet her with a drawer pulled clenched triumphantly between his teeth. Constance's retreat was so rapid it qualified as an Olympic sprint. She backpedaled onto the sidewalk, clipboard raised like a medieval shield, her usually perfect posture abandoned in favor of self-preservation. "I'm calling animal control," she announced to the gathering crowd of neighbors who, sensing entertainment of the highest order, had materialized with the speed usually reserved for free food at community events. Several had phones raised, recording what would later become neighborhood legend. Tyler Harrison's drone buzzed overhead, capturing a bird's-eye view that would eventually be set to Tchaikovsky's 1812 Overture, complete with cannon fire timed to match each major piece of furniture destruction. "Don't bother with animal control," Mrs. Fitzgerald called from her porch, where she sat comfortably in a rocking chair with an unobstructed view. "Those boys are just helping with the remodeling. Doing a fine job of it too, I'd say." A chorus of chuckles rippled through the crowd. Even Ted, who normally remained carefully neutral in neighborhood disputes to protect his position as HOA treasurer, couldn't suppress a smile. Constance's face cycled through a spectrum of colors that would impress a paint store. "This is destruction of property," she sputtered, gesturing wildly at the buffet carnage. "He left them out here on purpose." Mrs. Fitzgerald tilted her head thoughtfully. "Funny, I could have sworn I saw a delivery truck putting that thing on James's lawn without him being home. Almost like someone left their property on his lawn on purpose." The crowd's murmurs grew louder, punctuated by nods of agreement and a few pointed comments about what goes around comes around. Scout, sensing an appreciative audience, trotted to the edge of the lawn and performed his signature trick, balancing the wooden cherub on his nose for 3 seconds before tossing it in the air and catching it. A smattering of applause broke out, which only encouraged him to take a victory lap around what remained of the buffet.